The Crippses run cattle and Dorper sheep, and they want to rebuild their sheep numbers using Maremma dogs as guardians against predators. So while visitors are an important part of their cash flow, the discovery of foot and mouth disease in Bali in July this year has made them worry about travellers to the pastoral region unwittingly bringing the disease with them, particularly people who enter properties without permission.
Most of the paddocks here have main road frontage, so most of the paddocks on the property have a public road running through them. I'm not quite sure how we're going to manage the biosecurity risk.
How often would you find someone or evidence of someone being on your property without your consent?
Weekly, easily weekly. Yep, every week you'd find evidence that someone's been there.
What sort of things are they doing on the station that's causing problems for you at this point?
One of the biggest issues normally is just leaving gates open. And the worst case scenario is when you find where the tracks of a vehicle have come to a corner in a paddock and they can't get through, so they just cut the fence.
Some of the uninvited people Gemma says she finds on her property include hunters, photographers, bird watchers and prospectors. The 60-kilometre journey from Gabion Station to Greg Payne's property passes through land with a rich history of gold mining. Greg manages Badger Station where he runs goats, and he's the local Yalgoo Shire president.
It's very hard to control people coming on and off your property, especially a lot of prospectors, people that have done the right thing, have got their miners right and ring you and ask you if they can come on and whatever. That's pretty good, but there's still a lot of people that come out without letting you know that they're there.
Most pastoral properties in WA are Crown land, which is land owned by the state government and leased by pastoralists. While Aboriginal people with native title rights are able to access pastoral land to perform activities that come from traditional laws and customs, most people need permission to enter a pastoral property if it is leased. But for prospectors, the rules are different. In Western Australia, purchasing a miner's right allows people to go prospecting on Crown land, and that can include pastoral properties. A miner's right lasts for a person's lifetime, and there's been more than 155,000 of them issued in WA. There are rules surrounding a miner's right, like not doing damage to land surfaces or infrastructure. And prospectors are encouraged to notify pastoralists if they intend to access their property.
Do most people do the right thing, or would you say most people come on without contacting the pastoralist first?
I'd say it's probably 50-50, yeah, unfortunately. We still find people that don't. And that itself, biosecurity, which is a huge concern, but also a safety concern for us. We've got firearms out here that we need to use and things like that. And if we don't know that someone's camped out in the bush or whatever it is, accidents can happen, unfortunately.
An outbreak of foot and mouth disease in Australia has been modelled to cost up to $80 billion over a decade, and it would see livestock in an outbreak area destroyed.
If you're coming onto a pastoral lease, you need to ring the pastoralist and see if they have a biosecurity measures in place that they'd like you to follow.
Legally, Greg, what rights do you have as a pastoralist to say to someone, I don't want you to come onto my property?
Yeah, legally we don't really have much of a say in the
that?
sense. It's just the state, the way that they've set it up. Got to look at it a bit differently to us as individuals, that they can see that there's income and taxes and employment and things like that that are being generated. But it is very hard that, someone can literally ring up and, I don't know what a miner's right is, let's say it's $40 or something like that, and we don't really have much of a leg to stand on.
WA Agriculture Minister Alana McTiernan believes the risk of foot and mouth disease spreading through the pastoral region is low.
That is not to be interpreted as there won't be economic consequences. Of course there is. And what we have to always do is really be guided by the science. So the science is telling us that the best way, that it is very unlikely that the horse would have bolted before we have a detection. And the way in which we best handle this is the 72-hour stock lockdown. We get to understand, and that's the advantage of the electronic ID system. It is going to enable us to very quickly identify where all those infected animals have been. We understand, absolutely understand, it's been a real issue for pastoralists for a long time, that lots of people are coming through their areas. I noted that there has been this suggestion that maybe we need to modernise the miners' rights system so that we can make sure that those people that are entering onto pastoral properties utilising their miners' rights are properly informed about these biosecurity risks. So I'll certainly be talking to Minister Johnson about that.
The WA government is about to launch a general public biosecurity awareness campaign. But the state's Agriculture Minister does not support allowing pastoralists the right to refuse access to a miner's right holder. Further north, Michael Thompson and his family purchased Mundabulangana Station 27 years ago. People accessing the property to go hunting has been a constant frustration. It costs Michael Thompson between $50,000 and $100,000 each year in stock losses and repairs.
The worst thing they do is they cut our fences and shoot our stock. That's something it's frustrating and annoying, and it's very expensive. Cattle are expensive and always have been, but it's just sad, you know, to think that in today's world that people just think they can come and go and shoot what they feel like. So Munda's fully fenced now and gated, and every gate's locked. And every fence has a good standard, especially having 80 kilometres of the Northwest Coastal Highway going through our property.
Despite the locks, Michael Thompson says damage to infrastructure, theft of cattle and rubbish left on the property continues.
It's been an ongoing problem, being so close to a major centre like Port Hedland, where a population of 17,000, and we're not all that far from Karratha with a similar population.
Tony Seabrook heads up the Pastoralists and Graziers Association, which represents WA's pastoral industry to government.
The major issue here, it's about communication. It's about the people that want to enter a pastoral property which has been leased from the government, and there's a fee paid for that lease, and it's not small. They've leased the property to run cattle and sheep and run a business operation. And it's very unfair for anyone to think you can just go on there whenever you feel like it.
Do you think there is an innocent misconception that it looks like the bush, there's no one around, I can't see anyone, I can't see anything, so fair game, I'll go for a drive?
You've absolutely nailed it. That is exactly the situation. Sometimes you'll never see the property with the homestead, the sheds. It's very easy to assume that this isn't owned land, that you have a right of access. And I think that ignorance is probably one of the drivers behind what happens. But it doesn't deny the fact that people can do a lot of harm to a business operation, camping near a water point or something like that, and they don't even know the harm they're doing.
Tony Seabrook says he's more worried than ever about biosecurity on pastoral properties, with foot and mouth disease so close to Australia and other looming threats to livestock health, such as African swine fever and lumpy skin.
And look, there are two aspects to the biosecurity. One is keeping it out, and I'm hearing all sorts of stories about the laxness. But if it got into the country and someone unwittingly let this disease loose on a pastoral property, they would go home to their normal occupation, probably unaware of what they've done, and then the mass destruction of livestock would happen afterwards to control the harm that they've done.
Tony Seabrook believes groups with rights to access pastoral land, like miners, prospectors and traditional owners, should meet obligations of goodwill and communication. Back at Gabion Station, the Cripps family are now asking travellers to Bali to wash their shoes and suitcases before visiting pastoral properties. Regulating access remains a big issue, but it hasn't deterred them from continuing to welcome guests.
When things aren't going so well, you tend to see all the negatives, but when you've got people here and you've got to point out to them, you know, all the cool spots, I mean, coming to see these beautiful places, you tend to just forget about how amazing they are, and having people here to explain and talk to, yeah, it just helps to remind you how lucky we are to be able to be here too.
Ahead on Landline, a progress report on Inland Rail. We look at the winners.
It's boosted the productivity of the business and to no end. It's more than doubled this existing business.
And the losers.
It's not going to pick up our wheat at a competitive freight price like the other towns like your Moores, your Narrabris and your Narrabines, where Inland Rail is actually right there.
Hello, I'm Jess Davis. Just a week after the third La Niña in a row was officially declared, parts of New South Wales and southern Queensland have been inundated with heavy rains and flooding. Communities in western New South Wales have seen severe thunderstorms, with some small towns cut off from main roads by floodwaters. Farmers are tallying the impacts on crops, with some saying the quality of wheat will be downgraded. Victoria has also seen plenty of rain, with the state's largest water storage, Dartmouth Dam, finally reaching its tipping point, spilling over after sitting at 99% for weeks. It's seen an influx of visitors head to Dartmouth in the state's northwest.
Nature, you can't beat it. It's beautiful.
Despite the boost for tourism, the heavy flow of water downstream has forced landowners to prepare for flooding.
The last one in 1996 was almost 20,000 megalitres, and that was just an incredible spill that reached every extremity of the spillway and banged and crashed its way down into the Middle River and was just a sight to behold. I hope it doesn't get to that stage this year, because there'll be some very worried farmers further downstream if it ever got to that stage, and it would have to be a unique event, rainfall event, for it to reach any proportions like that. When it floods downstream, it becomes chaotic. Farmers have to shift all their pumps and that to higher ground. All their cattle have got to go to higher ground, and it becomes a bit of a logistical nightmare to manage a farm when floods are about of proportions like that.
It's the first time the 4 million megalitre dam has overflowed in 26 years. Traditional owners on the Tiwi Islands are celebrating a landmark court victory against gas giant Santos and its Barossa gas project in the Timor Sea. The federal court has ruled that the approval granted to Santos for the $4.7 billion project is invalid. Traditional owners argued they were not consulted about plans to pipe the gas through important sea country for processing in Darwin.
Like I said, I'm very happy. Man alive.
Santos has agreed to suspend drilling while it appeals to the full federal court or seeks a fresh environment plan. Rescue teams have saved dozens of whales stranded on a remote beach on Tasmania's west coast. An estimated 230 pilot whales beached themselves at Macquarie Heads near Strawn, and only a small fraction survived. Volunteer rescue teams worked through the day, physically carrying the whales on specially made slings to waiting boats. The animals were then towed out to sea and released. The dead whales will be towed out into deeper waters of the Indian Ocean, past the shelf drop-off, which begins about 40 kilometres off the coast, to reduce the risk of carcasses washing up on the beach. And finally, a farmer from New South Wales is in Ireland to compete in the International Oyster Opening Championships. Jim Yaneris can shuck 30 oysters in 2 minutes and 39 seconds. He beat his twin brother to win the Australian title in Narooma earlier this year, securing his ticket to Galway. The pair have been opening oysters since they were 8 years old, after being taught by their father. The family now own an oyster farm on the Clyde River near Batemans Bay. Mr Yanneris will be up against 15 super-fast oyster openers from around the world. And that's Landline News.
The $14.5 billion Inland Rail project is seen as transformational for regional Australia. Thousands of jobs have been created with millions of dollars flowing into the towns along the route. But after many years of work, just 300 kilometres of the line has been built. The federal government is set to announce a review following claims rushed planning has compromised a railway at risk of a changing climate. National Regional reporter Nathan Morris has the story.
A railway linking inland Australia with major seaports has been proposed for more than 130 years, and it's long been championed as nation building.
The opportunity that we provide to Australia is to totally change the way that we move freight around the nation.
A chance to transform regional towns.
It'll become the Memphis of Australia, not only because it has the big Elvis Festival, but because it will be the national logistics hub for Australia in the inland seaboard.
And a political point winner.
Well, I wanted the Inland Rail, and now we've got the money. We don't want to lose the money. We want to build it. They've started on it. Let's get the thing done.
The Inland Rail was first proposed in the mid-1990s, but it took decades to get a funding commitment, with construction finally beginning in 2018. But there have been some challenges.
A decade later, here we are with not a huge amount of inland rail built, but some real problems emerging.
Lack of consultation is considered first among them, starting with the landscape.
They haven't factored the river, they haven't factored the soil, they haven't factored the farming land.
Then there's the proposed route.
It certainly appeared like most of it was done desktop. To be perfectly honest, I think they just looked on Google Maps and went, no problems here, keep going.
Today the railways plan to connect Melbourne to Brisbane via central Victoria, western New South Wales and southern Queensland. The project will upgrade 1,100 kilometres of existing rail line and build 600 kilometres of new track to connect existing corridors. Every 24 hours it'll enable dozens of trains up to 1.8 kilometres long to travel 115 kilometres an hour across 3 states. Each train has the capacity to carry the same amount of freight as 110 B-double trucks. I travelled from Victoria through New South Wales and into Queensland to speak with people along the Inland Rail route. And there were two distinct perspectives: the enthusiastic big picture proponents and those still not convinced by the current plan. This ambitious project is warmly welcomed in southern New South Wales, where a run of good seasons has exporters working year-round to get produce to port.
This is the first year we've moved into the cottonseed storage and packing, so it has made things quite busy.
And as demand for Australia's agricultural goods grows, so too does the pressure on export businesses like this one near Wagga Wagga.
Cotton is continuing to grow, and I think it will probably be 30% bigger next year than it is this year.
The region is already well connected by rail to ports in Sydney and Melbourne, and the line here will be part of the Inland Rail. Exporter Peter Hassel hopes it'll help him meet demand for goods like cotton and grain.
Already we have plenty of merchants asking us whether we can handle more of their work.
Double-stacked trains and more services will be a feature of Inland Rail, enabling exporters to send goods north or south.
It'll also address the issues we have at the moment, trying to get trucks off the road, and also, the huge driver shortage there is in road transport.
It's hard to find a more enthusiastic proponent for the Inland Rail than Parkes Mayor Ken Keefe.
That's the new bridge to go over the railway line. of the Inland Rail.
The track upgrades between Parkes and Narromine was completed in September 2020. It spurred further construction, and major operators and manufacturers are already starting to move into the 4,800 hectare precinct along the line.
And we've had major interests at the moment in Brightmark, an American company who recycle plastics, a $260 million facility that they will start building next year.
Parkes has the most to gain of all towns along the Inland Rail line. It's at the intersection of the east-west line connecting Perth, Adelaide and Darwin, and is positioning itself as a major hub.
The year before last, we were second only to Byron Bay in the appreciation and value of houses in our community, and last year it rose by 26%. So it's still growing year on year, and a lot of people taking interest in positioning themselves in Parkes for the future.
But further north, there's still unresolved tension about the Inland Rail project. It stems from the decision of the government-owned company, the Australian Rail Track Corporation, or ARTC, to bypass existing railway lines and build a new track to save time. Although it's still a major grain receival site, Coonamble has seen better days. And some are worried the Inland Rail won't help. The line will bypass the town and dissect Barbara Dean's farm.
The other way that it's going to hurt us is that it's not coming past our silos, and it's not going to pick up our wheat at a competitive freight price like the other towns like your Moores, your Narrabris and your Narromines, where Inland Rail is actually right there.
Despite the years of work on the Inland Rail and numerous reports and reviews, Barbara is still looking for answers.
That's what's making us so angry. If it was looked at really well, all the right reports done, and they said, no, sorry, Barbara, it's just going to have to go through your farm because that's a benefit for everybody, then I would just have to say, OK, that's what you've got to do. But we have all these meetings, we have all the documents, we have so much that's saying you didn't do it. You haven't looked at the possibilities.
Time underpins the very reason for the Inland Rail. And farmers like Barbara Deans are worried that alternative routes have been ignored in order to keep the transit time under 24 hours.
The sub-24-hour transit time is what customers who want to consider moving their supply chains off of roads and onto rails, that is what they are continuing to tell us is important for them. So it's a key design feature. If we don't achieve a sub-24-hour transit time, then we won't get that modal shift onto rail that this is ultimately all about.
Farmer Adrian Lyons won't be directly impacted by the new line, but he's worried the cost to those farmers that will be hasn't been properly considered.
With the ARTC, who are been chartered to build this rail line, it's been an amateur hour and unprofessional from the outset. We have found the staff rotation, the consultation process, a disgrace.
He's concerned flooding and erosion from big rain events in the nearby Warrumbungle National Park will be made worse by rail embankments.
This is where the Inland Rail is potentially supposed to go. We're sort of standing in an area where there's a huge amount of water that comes through it, and hydrologically wise, we're very concerned about how they're going to build that. It's pretty simple. You cannot do a project without consultation, socially or economically. It has to be encompassing of the whole community. Lismore is an exact example of what not to do. Avoid that problem so you don't have devastation like that. That's what we're asking.
State approval for the Narromine to Narrabri section of the track is still yet to be granted, and there is an independent review of flood modelling yet to be released. Rebecca Pickering is the CEO of the ARTC.
I do understand the concerns of locals who are seeing behaviours in the floodplain right now and how infrastructure can impede floodwater, and we've certainly worked hard to make sure that we are not exacerbating those issues.
So why are they still worried?
Yeah, we've tried to take all of the concerned landowners through our models to show what is the difference in flood levels that our models create. And our designers have worked hard to make sure that we've got enough bridge structures, culverts that allow water to pass through, that ensure that flood water is not exacerbated.
We are route agnostic. I'm not telling them whether they should go this way or that way. All I'm saying is you never did your completed studies, and they should be now completed independently by a body other than ARTC, because it's tainted.
But for others in the nearby town of Gilgandra, opportunity outweighs concern and apprehension.
The proposed inland rail corridor intersects the Coonamble-Dubbo line here, approximately 20 kilometres north of Gilgandra. So the opportunity here for our local growers as well is to have that connectivity to either export out via Melbourne or head north and go via Brisbane.
The Inland Rail will cross the vast Pilliga Forest to reach Narrabri, about 6 hours north of Sydney. It's a town built around major cotton and grain industries and home to over 7,000 people. Upgrades to the existing line are already underway. It's also not far from Santos's Narrabri gas project, and Mayor Ron Campbell is another who's hoping his town will be a manufacturing and export hub.
They'll run a pipeline to this 1,000 acres, our northern New South Wales inland port, and that will be the energy that we'll use, amongst the renewables as well, that we'll use to support what we hope to be a vibrant manufacturing industry.
The benefits of the Inland Rail construction are evident in this local concrete business.
It's boosted the productivity of the business in regards to the material that we're carting out of our quarry and our concrete at the present moment. It's doubled the production.
However, Narrabri is built on the banks of the Nemoy River, and when it floods, huge parts of the town can go under. Jim Purcell is a civil engineer specialising in water engineering, and Cara Stoltenberg is a former town planner with the Narrabri Council. They fear the new rail corridor downstream of the town could make flooding worse.
The real issue is the embankments at either end. And Inland Rail are finding that out now as they get into the detailed design, that there are areas where they were going to have an embankment, which they now have to extend the bridge or build another bridge so as to not flood further.
What do they say when you bring these criticisms up at these public forums?
Well, I've learnt that Inland Rail have got their own brand of community consultation, and that is, you explain the problem and they look you in the eye and say, well, the route is set and will not change.
Jim has suggested an alternative route that he says would affect fewer properties and lessen the effect of flooding.
If we shifted further downstream like our alternative suggested, we can save between $100 and $200 million in unnecessary bridges. We can do away with unnecessary impacts, and we can make it a better rail line for Inland Rail because it's flat, it's straight, and it's easier to build. Now, the engineers know that. When we talk to them, you can tell they understand what we're saying. The problem is they've been told not to shift anything.
Next week, we continue up the Inland Rail line, where flooding has already torn up some of the old rail corridors. And we'll hear from a former ARTC project director who remains critical of the initial planning process.
It was very clear that it had been done in a rush.
Rushed? It should have happened like 1950.
49 centimetres is the discrepancy in that height and their modelling. So where else are their measurements out?
The Inland Rail story continues next week on Landline.
Thomas Foods International officially reopened the Burke Abattoir on Friday, nearly 12 months after taking over the facility, which had been sitting idle for a few years. This abattoir is geared up to process 3,000 animals a day, and the main focus for TFI will be on goats. I spoke to the company's chief executive, Tony Stewart.
So it's been a bit of a journey, but we've got a great team here that we've put together to get us to today. The next stage now is to really transition into full operation. So over the next 3 to 6 months, we're looking to build the workforce and get our production levels up to around 3,000 a day. Beyond that, the facility actually has more potential, more capacity, so we're also investing in the infrastructure here to allow it to process up to 6,000 a day, which is a plan that we're working on right now, and we've got capital investment that will come over the next 12 months to support that, along with building our workforce progressively to achieve that outcome.
So, Tony, in terms of locations, what makes you confident about investing out the back of Burke?
Well, from a supply point of view, it's perfectly positioned. Goat is a product that is developing in terms of the supply side of that here in Australia. It's becoming more organised, more professional, and therefore more secure. The markets are there. So we have an international network within the Thomas Foods International Group, and we've been selling and processing goat in our other facilities for a long time. So we know the markets are there. We know the supplies here up in northern New South Wales, and we're very confident that there's a long-term future for this facility.
What markets are you targeting?
The biggest market by far is North America. So about 70% of what we'll process here will go into the North American market, which is a market that we have actually a significant footprint in under the TFI group.
And what would be your take on where Australia's goat industry is heading over the next 5 years or so?
Look, I feel good about the Australian meat industry generally, and goat is just another element of that. It's the 5th largest consumed meat globally, so there's a lot of opportunity. And for us, as I say, we also have the distribution network to ensure that we're building the right customers and the right markets for goat products coming out of Australia.
What do you hope this facility means for the town of Burke?
Look, a lot. Our team's been actually blown away by the level of support and just genuine desire to make this work. It's been a long journey. If you go back to 2019 when it was originally completed, we've got up to 250 jobs that'll be created here, long-term sustainable jobs over the next couple of years, and the impact of that is tremendous to the community. Thomas Foods is a family-owned business. We're here to stay, and we're here to invest and really be a proactive contributor to the community of Burke.
That's Tony Stewart from Thomas Foods International. According to Meat and Livestock Australia, goat prices have been on the slide since June. With supply on the rise, over-the-hook prices have fallen about 15% to $7.70 a kilo carcass weight. The United States is by far Australia's biggest customer for goat meat, and across the board, exports are up 38% year on year. Lamb prices picked up this week with tight supply in many areas because of the rain. There was no sale at Wagga because of the public holiday, and I'm told processors are prioritising lambs at the moment, which is reducing demand for mutton. Cattle prices remain firm. Rain and plenty of green grass are keeping restockers interested. Wool prices were down across all micron ranges this week. There's plenty of wool about. The number of bales sold at auction this season is now 15% greater than this time last year. Australia's winter crop harvest is officially underway. Here's a look at the first loads of wheat arriving at the receival site in Dingo, Queensland. I'm told buyers are starting to become more active, which is pushing wheat values up. The canola market continues to ease though, and the rain in New South Wales is causing some problems. Russia might be sitting on a record wheat crop, but the level of uncertainty in the Black Sea ramped up a notch this week, which pushed wheat futures higher. In New York, fears of global recession and hence lower cotton demand continues to weigh on that market. And last week I was talking about some record bull prices. Well, 2 of those records mentioned have been broken again. In fact, since the start of the month, the Australian breed record for Santa Gertrudis bull has been broken 4 times. The title now belongs to the Yarrawonga Cattle Company, which sold this guy during the week for $250,000. I wonder how long that record will last. And that is the Landline Check on prices. Keep it rural.
The winner of this year's Top Landcare Award is using his platform to blow the whistle on passive chemical pollution from agricultural sprays and its impact on native vegetation. Landline's Sean Murphy travelled to Narromine in New South Wales to meet fourth-generation farmer Bruce Maynard.
It takes a bird's-eye view to reveal the transformation of this fourth-generation mixed farm near Narromine on the central western plains of New South Wales.
We've gone crazy with triangles and herringbones and concentric squares and concentric circles and all sorts of different types. But in general, the rule to be taken away from this is if you can, and it's practical and logistical, plant things in a curve. You get much more benefit for the same amount of investment.
Yeah, so Bruce, what's the For Bruce Maynard, circular shelter belts using salt bush fodder crops are just part of the transformation of Willydar. Over the last 35 years, he's planted 350,000 shrubs and 200,000 trees across his 1,600-hectare farm. He's still recovering from drought, but this herd of Angus cattle on agistment have up to 100 different species of plants and grasses to feed on.
So we've been encouraging diversity, and we really don't make much of a judgment whether it's native or naturalised, but we have a preference for native species because they bring a bigger package of nutrient cycling suite of organisms with every time we get a native plant establishing versus something introduced from outside.
In Bruce Maynard's cropping program, the commitment to diversity and natural landscape, nothing is removed or killed.
We have 80 or 100 different species here, legumes, old grasses of summer grasses and winter grasses and annuals, and all the weeds that would be present here in the normal spot. But the wheat can still go and give us an achievable yield in this area.
Let's have a look at some, huh?
So we have the wheat growing in amongst all of this great mass of all sorts of other things. At the moment, they're showing some indications of some infection by natural pathogens. We're not going to.
That's rust, yeah.
Yes, I suspect so. Yes, and that sort of pathogen normally in a monocropping situation, you would spray out that, because if that was left unchecked when there was just wheat alone in this situation, then that would potentially take out all your crop. In our situation here, there's still a heap of diversity, so we're going to let it be. We're not going to be spraying that. We'll let all of the natural functions here continue, and we'll take a lesser yield, but we're aiming for an optimum yield rather than a maximum yield.
It means yields at harvest time are a quarter to a third of what conventional cropping systems will average nearby.
But in terms of total biomass, when we inspect all of the other plants, over a whole year period, you'll grow 30% or more total biomass. So the trick is, let's make money from that other biomass, and that's where animals come in to take advantage of that. It's a whole system rather than just a grain alone system.
At Willydar, they're rebuilding their flock of mixed-breed meat sheep. Animals are key to the system here, but they've also taken Bruce Maynard on a decades-long journey